everyone, thank you so much for coming today. Sam and I are really excited and happy to be here, and I'm personally really excited to be chatting with Sam because I admire her work so much. So we're just going to have a very casual in conversation event, and we've both drafted questions for each other, and I feel like we could touch upon many similar themes in our work. So we both write about families, we write about bodies, we write about being a woman, shame, like I feel that's and nostalgia, memory, lots of different so I feel like we've got a lot of common themes in our work. But I thought an opening question we could both answer is sort of what motivated you to first start write memoir, Sam, and sort of what sparks an essay for you?
For me, I think that non-fiction has always been the form for me. I've tried writing fiction and it just feels quite false. Like it feels mechanical to me. I don't understand the people that are like, it just comes out of me, like, from where? So yeah, non-fiction, I guess, and poetry and the places that those two things meet have always been the form for me. And as to what is the start of a piece or what provokes a piece, I think for me shame is a big part of it. I think personal writing has responsibility to I guess be a force for either good or sense making in some way, and unpacking shame is a huge way to do that. So for me, with Eating with my mouth open was about unpacking existence in a fat body and coming to terms with, I don't know what that means, shame around food, shame around eating, and I think leaning into the stories that make me feel uncomfortable. I've learned that that is where the best stories come from. The more I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't write about that, the more energy and life and sort of zippiness it has. So I think leaning towards the uncomfortable things for me is a real motivator. How about you?
Thank you. So I also first came to writing memoir from a place of shame. So I wrote a lot about sex and cultural identity. So when I first started writing in 2016, 2015, there weren't many Asian Australians writing about sex. So I couldn't talk to my mum about it, and I had experienced some really horrible non-consensual experiences, and so I didn't have anyone to talk to at that point. I didn't have really many close friends, so I started writing memoir as a way to process a lot of difficult experiences and difficult memories, and sort of to learn to forgive myself, and also to claim back the narrative, because I felt that I guess memoir is particularly powerful because when a reader reads it, they know this has happened to a real person in the real world. And obviously memoir is very crafted, and we'll obviously touch upon this further in our discussion. Like, you're taking raw material, you're taking your life, and you're turning into this very specific, intentional narrative. And I guess also I was reading a lot of memoirists, and they made me feel less alone. And so I really wanted to help other people feel less alone, so that's why I started writing memoir too. And when I try to write fiction, it's very autobiographical. Like, I just can't get out of my head. I can't create worlds, I can't create characters. The character is me. And then in terms of what sparks an essay, nowadays I feel like I write more from a place of joy. So possession of this visual arts or films or pop music I like to use them as a jumping point. But I think I still write a lot about relationships. And I also still use writing as a way to grapple with unresolved questions. But I also, I would love to talk more about this, leaning into uncomfortable spaces and experience. Like, it's not easy.
True, it's not. I guess vulnerability is a big part of memoir writing about things that actually happened to you, and understanding, the part that you played and all that sort of thing, but also knowing that you're a character in the thing that you're writing. There's sort of this tension between crafting something for the page and, I don't know, I feel like in order to write anything from personal experience, you have to have some sort of distance from it to get something useful out of it. I'm interested in how you have dealt with vulnerability in your work, because you do write about belonging and identity and growing up, and I guess cultural mismatches, that sort of thing. How does vulnerability play a role for you?
I'm trying to think the best way to answer this question. I think when I guess, this is something I feel I have to constantly remind myself of, that the first draft isn't for anyone else but you. Like, no one's reading it, no one's looking over your shoulder. So just to give a very current recent example, I'm trying to write about a breakup that happened a year ago, and my ex has asked me, please don't write about me, like please don't include me in your future work. And this is a very difficult to grapple with, because I am very interested in writing about romantic relationships. I'm very interested in like how do you transform this 10,000 words sort of draft and all these sort of memories and things that you're annoyed about and angry about to direct to this specific person, but I don't want that out in the world. That's not interesting to an audience. Like, I think what I've been trying to grapple with is like, well, what is the deeper message here? And for me, I think it's more around like women and like what we're told we're allowed to desire or what we're allowed to need. And like when you need something more from your partner and they're not able to give that to you, and you deciding to walk away, I thought that was selfish. And I'm realizing now, like, yes, there is a level of selfishness involved in that decision, but if I had stayed, that wouldn't have been true to myself. And I think this is probably something a lot of women experience in relationships, where like it's not a shit relationship on the surface, but you're not getting what you need. And so to me, I think that's the deeper thing, and that's what I need to put on the page somehow. So it's not a portrait of my ex. It's not really about him. It's more about what I learned from the relationship. So I really would love to hear more about how you go about this process, Sam, because you write about very sort of intimate, difficult things like mental health and family, and like I feel like you're very intentional in how you sort of like so set parameters, I guess, around like what you're sharing and like giving people enough context, but not having to share everything. So I just think you do it so well.
Yeah, I think there's definitely like a boundaries edit, like a pass through, like, so there's the writing that you do for yourself where you're processing things or putting down things that you have processed in therapy where they should actually be processed, and then later edits where, like, I had a whole edit of this book that I came to think of as the hungry edit, where my editor had said something about like, oh, there's certain bits where the sensory detail isn't as strong as others, and she was talking specifically about the food stuff. So I went through and did like a real snacky edit. Like I ate a lot and I thought a lot about food and like sensory detail and all of that. I've diverged from your question.
Okay.
I think in terms of setting boundaries, I don't know, it's kind of a imperfect, like I feel like there's definitely a sense around memoir writing where people want to just be given like a sticky note that says like, here's your permission to put everything on a page that you need to, and you absolutely have that permission, but then there's sort of a process where you start thinking about like the practical stuff, like how litigious is my family, or like the stuff about having ongoing relationships, because it's different to write about someone that you've broken up with versus someone that you're going to see at family dinner in the next few weeks or whatever. So sort of grappling with the realities of where their boundaries are, where your boundaries are, and what is conducive to an ongoing relationship if that's what you want. In some cases, and especially in cases where people are writing about trauma and that sort of thing, I think burn it all to the ground. Like, there's sort of like, I don't have a relationship with those people, I don't need to, that's not a consideration. And like, unless you're getting your pantsuit off, it's probably not, like, it's not something that you overly need to think about, and writing an emotionally true story is the more important thing. But yeah, there's definitely a process of thinking about like how are people going to take this, and I think I had a lot of conversations with mainly my parents. So both of my parents are in this book, my brother's in this book, my partner is barely in this book. I had a lot of conversations. The conversations with my mum were mainly about fatness and learning to accept living in a bigger body. The things that I felt I had learned from her, and how I was unlearning them, and writing the book was a process of unlearning them. Like the book actually has two beginnings, because when I started writing it, my understanding of everything was so different that when I came to the point of sort of wrapping it up, I was like, oh, I can't live with leaving that there without saying I know differently now. So it has two beginnings, one where I know and one where I don't. And I had a lot of conversations with my dad about, I guess, truthiness in nonfiction, and like the unreliability of memory, and how it is that you deal with, you know, your experience of something is different to my experience of something, but that doesn't make either of ours a lie. It's just how it's the nature of subjectivity. Like we see the world through our bodies. Like that's how it is. How do you deal with if you've got a memory and you're not sure whether it's a reliable one? How do you deal with that?
I don't think I have an answer to this just yet. I'm trying to think if I have a specific example. I think I generally write about things that have happened in the because I think when I first started writing memoir, it was often things that had happened within the same year or like the previous year. So like I think it was like the time had not passed in a way that, so it was easier in a way to remember things. Whereas now I think we're trying to write essays that kind of span a longer time span. So they might start from from writing on an essay, like what essay I'm working on at the moment. I started in 2018, it is now 2025, and I don't think I've finished it yet. And I think I'm very drawn to dialogue, and I know that when you write dialogue, you're not taking notes and you're not recording what someone's saying to you. And so I know that when I write dialogue, it's never going to be 100% accurate, but I think it's more about, and I'm stealing this from, like I've heard this idea before about emotional truth, and how like it's not going to be necessarily factually accurate, but it's emotionally accurate. And I think also, like, I don't know, you also can make like decisions about whether you put things in quotation marks or you kind of just talk it in a more general sense, like we talked about blah 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 blah, and then you don't it's less of a dialogue exchange. But I know that there's all these decisions that one makes, and then it affects how I guess the atmosphere of that scene then changes, because you're so I think it's something I haven't quite worked out how to do, because I feel like if I make it too general, the risk is people will misinterpret it or might read things into it that I hadn't intended. But then if I make it too specific, I might be exposing myself or exposing the person I'm writing about too much. So like I know people can go back to diaries. Like
Are you a journal reader?
Yes, but I don't often. I don't always go back to them. I think it's just kind of they're there, and I also have a blog that I haven't updated for a long time. So I know if I wanted to go back to what did 2013 Shu-Ling think about Canberra, like I can access that through my blog, but like that's not what I'm writing at the moment. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I'm curious, like Sam, like I'm really glad you touched upon how you had those two beginnings in your book, because I found that like really intriguing. Like I really admired the honesty then, in the way that you didn't have to include that original beginning. Like you could have just left it out, or you could have just chose not to include it. But I felt it was just very honest, and like I guess it kind of showed how in the process of writing your book, your I guess your thoughts and you yourself had changed. So I wonder if you could like kind of expand on that a little bit more about how the process of memoir writing. I guess, how do you reconcile like who you were at the beginning of the book versus who you were when you finished writing the book?
I think there's something about the way that you and I both write that I think we were talking about it as having like a sort of spaciousness, and the form of essays in this sense is very collaborative with readers. So we're asking questions and we're asking readers to come along with us to answer the questions instead of, so I think the way that you think of essay coming out of school is like, I've got an argument to make and I'm gonna do this many different points in defense of the argument, and then at the end I will go, ta-da, that's why my argument is correct. But this form of essaying that we both do is, I think, more or less certain. I think that it's more about figuring out what the question is rather than what the answer is. And I think that there's something really special and energetic for readers in being able to form those questions and find those possible answers and, you know, disregard other answers along the way and all that sort of thing. So there's definitely something artificial about constructing an arc of your own understanding. And I had a really hard time finding what the narrative through line was for my work. It ended up being, so I was lucky to spend some time at Varuna, which is a writer's house in the Blue Mountains, and I worked with someone there called Carol Major, who is like a writing therapist, which should be something that exists on the PBS, truly. So she offered this service where we would be able to go and sit with her and sort of just talk out what the problems were that we were having with our manuscripts, and she helped us figure out a solution. So Carol came up with this sort of metaphor of like, so you're in a corridor, right? And because it deals so much with memory, and because I'm dipping in and out of memories and they're not necessarily linear, the corridor is essential. You need to keep going into a door, coming back to the corridor. So the corridor is my understanding throughout the thing of like, I mean, all of it. But having an anchor to come back to is, I suppose, what we arrived at, and that sort of shifted my view of, how to structure the thing. I've forgotten what other questions we have. Before you were talking about, so you've been writing about windows, right? And you're also writing about a relationship breakup. What comes first? Are you in the gallery looking at paintings of windows and noticing windows in films and going, I find windows really interesting, what's that about? And then you're digging until you find out that actually that's about a relationship breakdown? Or are you knowing that at some point you're going to need to write about this relationship, and then somewhere along the way the windows metaphor comes in and you go, oh, that's the thing that holds it together?
Thank you for asking this timely question. So this idea about writing about windows actually came to me in 2021, so just before I even had met my ex. And it was, so obviously before I met him, I was writing it while I was still with him, and I'm still writing it now that he's no longer in my life. And the thing that sparked my interest in windows initially was like one of my favorite films, In the Mood for Love, which is a Wong Kar-wai film about loneliness. There's this scene where like the two protagonists look out separate windows, and I kind of look into the audience, and there's something, I don't know, I was just really moved by that image, and I just kept coming back to it. And then I was in the gallery and I was seeing a lot of paintings of women standing in my windows looking out into the world, and you often can't see their face, like they're faceless women, and they'd be like dreaming and like a symbol of longing. So whether they're longing for the past or the future, a lover or some other life, I was very drawn to this image. So I feel like I had the window idea and the image of the woman standing by the window, that was what caught my interest. And then I was in a long distance relationship, and I was like, oh wow, distance and longing, yes, this fits in. And then now, like more recently, I have been debating whether to cut out that romance through like theme. Like I'm just like, maybe this is a separate essay, like maybe the window and the love stuff, and then you know, I feel that this essay is trying to attempt a lot. Like, it's 9,000 words. It's also about housewives. It's also about my fear of feeling trapped in suburbia, like trapped in Werribee in Hoppers Crossing. It's also my fear of being a public servant for the rest of my life. So it's all these different things that kind of like came in, like so they weren't there at the beginning. So in 2021, I was not thinking about all these other things, but as I've continued writing and exploring this idea of windows, all these other interesting ideas kind of started sort of, was it like magnets, like gravitating, and I was like, I can see they're all linked, and I'm trying to share to my reader, yes, these are all linked. Like,
is there a chance that it's a book?
it's like a big portion of my current book. I feel like it could be book length, so
Yeah, because it sounds to me like just workshopping here with you, Robin, thank you. It sounds to me like maybe each of those sort of things that you're like, maybe it's not that, maybe I cut that out. Like maybe each of those is a chapter, and actually the whole book is about windows.
I was thinking about writing a book about windows. I think it's like, well, it's about 1/3 of my, to be honest, this essay now is like 1/3 of my manuscript.
So maybe the other 2/3 of your manuscript are another essay, and the essay is a book. This is what I'm going for.
Thank you for helping me workshop my manuscript.
No worries.
But yeah, I guess this is kind of like, I mean, I'm curious, like, because when I think some of the essays, and I know it's marketed as a memoir, but I feel Eating with My Mouth Open is kind of also an essay collection. Like, they're like this sort of really beautiful vignettes and snippets where you kind of coming back to your really beautiful and great metaphor about the corridor. And I feel like I need to borrow that because I also need a corridor in my manuscript. But like, I was very curious about how you, for example, you've got little, like, there's like some of the chapters are just one page, and like they might be sort of revolve around Alice in Wonderland, or like there's a really the octopus sort of metaphor, like image really early on in the book. And I'm just wondering how some of these one-page essays, like, how did they come about, and how did you know you weave them in so beautifully, and I'm like, how do you do that? How do you like do such an amazing like work at sequencing and bringing in everything together?
Can I call you for pep talks? So this actually, the book came out of my honours thesis, which was about whether it's possible to write something for the page that reflects the way that memory moves. In particular sense memory around food. So there's a lot in the book that's about sort of the longevity of those memories, and like some of them you start at one place and you sort of do this rabbit hole thing where they lead to something else and something else and something else, and they're not necessarily tied together by chronology, or like sometimes it's a common character, or usually it's a common flavour, or so these things are tied together in sort of these wacky logic ways. Like it's not the logic that you would normally think of in a memoir, but it's sort of the logic that your brain goes with. So a lot of the process of writing this was about mapping, just about being really attentive to the ways that my own memory worked, and mapping where they went. I ate and I thought a lot. Which was nice. And in terms of I was really sort of attached to the idea of things being as long as they need to be. I don't know if you've ever read much Lydia Davis, but she's a short story writer. She has some short stories go for 20 pages, some of them are half a page, and it's truly like she just does whatever needs to be done and then leaves. And I really wanted to recreate a bit of that, because I think that that's what your memory does as well. Sometimes you can get stuck on something, and other times you kind of go, that's right. This thing that I didn't expect to remember has come back to me, like, oh, the smell of carrots reminds me of my grandfather. Oh, I didn't expect to, and it catches you in the shopping centre, or somewhere strange. So yeah, they all sort of hang together, I hope, in some sort of neural map. we did lots of good workshopping of what we were going to talk about.
Can I ask you a question, please?
I would also like to ask you about your research process then, because I feel like you weave science, you weave in some pop culture, sort of like, I think, not so much film, but I think it's a few little literary references in your book. And maybe there were some film. I'm questioning my own memory now of your book. But yeah, I really am curious to hear more about your research process and how you bring, like, we both take the very personal, mundane memories and tie them to like bigger socio-political questions. So I wonder, I know I'm asking you two questions now, but one was around research and one around tying the personal to the bigger world questions. Please choose which question you would like to answer first.
I think a kind of writing becomes this sort of hyper-focused thing where it sucks everything else into it, and at some point you've got to be like, it's done now. That is no longer an influence. But until I get to that point, or until I feel that point, everything becomes research, right? Like everything that I read, that I watch. At the moment, I'm writing an essay about politics in fashion and size inclusion, and whether we can unmake anti-fat bias by including bigger sizes in regular in-store size ranges. And on the way down here, I was listening to a podcast that I got on this whole thing about like, COVID fashion and the ways that like it reflects what was happening at the time. And like, I didn't get in the car today being like, I'm going to do some research on the way down there. It just came up through a podcast that was, on my queue anyway. So yeah, I think it's sort of a vortex that sucks everything in and everything becomes relevant. And I've got this, I don't know, it kind of becomes a game of like pattern matching where it's almost like there's a resonance with the things that fit with the idea that you're talking about, and you find the things and you go, oh, that clicks in, that clicks in, that clicks in. And I don't know, the metaphor collection or something. How does it work for you?
Yeah, I feel like this whole window thing that I'm now obsessed with. I feel like, there's lots of painters who have painted windows or like taken like photographs of windows, and I'm also like I'm struggling to work out like what to include, because I can't include everything. And so for example, there's a painter called Gwen John, and she's Welsh, and has this really beautiful painting of a woman sitting in front of a window, and she's knitting, and there's a little cat beside her, and the window behind her is open, and the neighbor's window opposite the alleyway is also open. And I want to write about this, and I don't quite know how to like shove it into my essay yet. And I agree that lots of like, and then when you talk to people about what you're working on, they also, kind of like, so when I first spoke to a friend about this window essay, she's like, is it a COVID essay? I'm like, no, it's not a COVID essay. And I think the writing of the essay shapes you as well. And like, there's so many angles I could take with this window essay, and I was reading a lot about architecture. I'm reading about architecture and feminism, and like the design of kitchens, and how like a lot of design in our life is shaped by assumptions. It's shaped by assumptions of who is doing the cooking, how many people are in the kitchen. You hide the mess of the kitchen from the rest of the house. So like these are all, I think, again, like I find the research process often very interesting, but it's so hard to know sometimes like how much to include. But I don't know, I guess that gets to a point where I feel like some essays I've read, like you can tell the authors put a lot of work into research, and you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. So I think maybe what I'm trying to come back to this Gwen John painting I mentioned at the beginning of my response is like, I now have a line in my essay where I talk about like, I didn't want to be a woman standing by the window. And I was like, okay, But then there are some times when it is actually quite nice to be a woman standing by the window when, I guess maybe when you're taking a pause out from your daily life and you're just like open the window and there's like a fresh air comes in. And so, or this Gwen John painting of a lady knitting is like a very coziness. So I feel like maybe I'm getting to a point where like there's a difference between certain paintings, like the ones where men are painting with their wife standing by the window. There's like a very facelessness and lack of agency. Whereas like I think Gwen John, she painted that painting, and so I feel there's a lot of agency and action and move, like a sense of connection and community for some reason because the window's open. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question at the moment, but yeah, I think it's sometimes like taking, like acknowledging the small everyday moments. Like, I mean, there's so many beautiful small everyday moments in your writing, Sam. Like, I don't know, I love the mango section, and I love like the way you write about offal. Like, it's just very like unexpectedly sexy section of your book. You write about it in such a sexy way.
I had a thing with Gutandon, which is ox tongue sliced very thinly in like this buttery gravy kind of sauce. Japanese, it's very, very delicious. And because my brain is my brain and I can't unlanguage anything, like I can't just have an experience in my body, it somehow becomes rooted in language, and started thinking about sort of tongues and meat and eating tongue. There's something very, a little obscene about the tongues of the tongue. So yeah, it started in my body and became a language thing, and then yeah, it just had to be picked apart. We are about to throw to audience questions because we have 10 to go. So have a think about what your question is, if you've got any. While you're doing that, I'm going to throw back to you, Shu-Ling, and ask how you make it work, because it sounds like the Windows essay that you're working on at the moment started in 2018. Yeah, that's a slow burn, which is fine. I love that. I love that slow, thoughtful process and things developing whatever time they're developing. But how does creativity and writing and that sort of long distance meaning making, how does that fit in with having a day job and getting on with your life?
I work part-time, which really helps. I mean, I guess a big part of my writing practice is I never want to rely on writing for the bulk of my income. So I have a day job as well. And this does mean I can take as long as I want to write something. Like sometimes it actually takes 2 years for me to write an essay, which means it would take me 20 years to write a book, which is quite horrifying. But some of my favorite essay collections are like How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. I think he said the essays in that were written over a period of like 20 or 25 years. So I'm like, oh thank God, there's like hope for me yet. But I think when you're writing about big things like romantic love, like you can't rush it. Like I don't want to be someone who has to like pump out pieces just for the sake of pumping out pieces. And like, for example, my relationship was, it was a 2-year relationship, a 2-year long distance relationship. And I did write about the relationship while I was in it, but a lot of those were like short, happy pieces. And now I feel like I am interested in like, unpacking that relationship, but also more about like my pattern. Like, why do I keep dating emotionally unavailable men? Like, and I think that for example, you start writing about like race and relationships, and then like, that's a huge thing. And again, like, I don't want to have to rush or like, I don't know, provide some pithy answer, because sometimes there are no pithy answers, and you have to take time to think things through. And coming back to, I think the comment you made earlier, Sam, about having that emotional distance from that memory. And I think if I had tried to write about my breakup like a month after the breakup, I would have just been like ranting and like it wouldn't really have served me or what I want to say about that relationship. Like sometimes you have to spend a lot of time working out what are you trying to say, and I feel like that's like 90% of the battle is like working out what am I trying to say.
100%. I think it can help a lot to try and tell other people what you're trying to say. We were talking about writers groups before we came on, and I think having someone be like, "What are you working on this morning?" is some of the most fruitful time for me, because then they put some stuff in, and or they go, "Oh, what do you mean?" And then I have to figure it out live, and that's, I don't know, it's useful. Questions? Yes.
Hi. Just would you like to talk about the the initial creative writing first draft headspace compared to your self-editing, thinking of the audience sort of headspace? Do you want to take it first? Yep.
I think it's funny. I think that I heard someone, can't attribute it because I can't remember who it was. Heard someone once say that the only thing that you learn from writing a book is, like, you don't learn how to write more books by writing one book. And I think that that's the same with every piece of writing. Like, I feel like I don't know if I have a set trajectory every time I approach research. Right now, the piece that I'm writing started with statistics, and the going forward bit is me going, well, where's the poetry in this? Where's the beauty and the self-expression and the personal experience in it? So that's where I'm at the moment.
I often start with a lot of stream of consciousness writing, so like I will just type, and like kind of let the ideas and the memories kind of all jumble up together. Like, I'm not even trying to do a narrative at that point. So a lot of my early drafts are just stream of consciousness, and then like maybe later on I'll go back and like actually read through what I wrote, and usually there's a space of time, and then I kind of like, oh, that line's really interesting, or oh, that idea is really interesting. Like, I kind of like, I think where you can feel this energy, I think it's often like, where, like, if you're like, that line's boring, like, I'm not going to bother trying to like delve into that further. But if there's something I find there's a sense of energy or urgency around it, then I will take that, put into another document, and then maybe like try to add or expand on it. And it gets my writing process is so inefficient. Like, I have to like, why can't writing be more efficient? And sometimes I'll go back to documents from like 5 years ago or 2-3 years ago, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting.
Who wrote that?
And I think, I also do quite enjoy the final revision stage. Like, obviously you have to do all of the pre-work to get to the final like revision stage. And I find like with like longer pieces of work with lots of complex sort of, I don't know, you're trying to juggle lots of different things. If I'm struggling with the structure, I'll actually print it out and physically cut it, and shuffle things around on the floor. Like, I found that really, really helpful for essays that I'm like just getting stuck on.
Another question?
Yeah, that's actually a really nice segue into it. I was going to ask a bit more about structuring, because memoir and memory is all jumbly as a concept anyway. They're not always a linear, this happened when I was 5, and then when I was 7 this happened, and whatever. So first drafts, you're like, oh, I'll pick this out and I'll just write about this, and then you might have all these disparate things that aren't sort of chronological and stuff. And I really liked the advice you got about you can have all these different things and they can come off this corridor and then come back to the corridor. But I suppose, does that mean you need to have a really strong, overarching theme, for want of a better word, that is the corridor thing? Like, how do you make that work?
Potentially, but like, I don't think that you need to go in with it. Like, you don't necessarily need to know what the central theme is before you have all the disparate bits that you can then print out, shuffle around on the floor. Something that I think in Australia we don't do particularly well, but the American sort of school of nonfiction writing does a lot of really great writing about process and structure and that sort of thing. Lyric essays, and there's a form called braided essay, which sort of takes multiple themes and weaves them in and out of one another. And I think that was really instructive for me of figuring out what my braids were and how, sort of what the rhythm wanted to be and recognizing that it wasn't chronological, because that's not how emotional memory works, and that's not how sensory memory works, but there was something almost musical about the way that they fit together, and being able to sort of you've got to have something to work with before you can step back and figure out what that organising motivation is.
This concept of theme is something I'm curious about too. Like, I'm not quite sure if you mean theme within the essay or like a collection.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like the braided essay that you were kind of talking about, you know, might be 3 things braided together. So for yours, it might be food, family, and size. You know, if you were going to kind of break it down to 3 themes, like I don't know if that's quite the right word, but they're your things that are kind of like going down your corridor, and then little, you know, bits of string or whatever they're made out of are coming out into the doorways and whatever. Yeah, so that's what I kind of mean by theme.
I feel like sometimes this concept of theme comes partway through the process. I don't think you might, I'm assuming Sam, you probably wrote a lot about food before you started your manuscript. You had some separate essays that were previously published.
About noticing a preoccupation of like, oh, I've accrued this whole body of work about things I've eaten. Maybe there's something in that, like that. Yeah.
So for me, similarly, like a lot of my earlier essays were about sex, but then like I initially, once upon a time, thought I wanted to write a book about feminism, sex, and cultural identity, and then I realized that is not the fullness or the breadth of who I am. And also, my mum will hate that book, so I can't write that book. And then I started thinking a lot more about like cultural sort of inheritance. So I wrote more about like Chinese pop music, and then this theme of windows and visual art, I think, and is more of a recent. I feel like I want to write things I'm interested in, and then the theme will emerge. Like I don't think I'm gonna, like some people might start a theme and then, I mean, I feel like you had to do almost like a chunk of writing, and then you can start observing what are the patterns. And I know like publishers, they like always want, they need to sell your book. So
Someone else's job.
Yeah, I think like write as much, like write first, and then kind of see what themes emerge, and then maybe from there kind of start working out. But I feel like people ask me, oh, what's your book, your manuscript about? And I'm like, oh, about longing, because I feel like longing is broad enough to cover a lot. So I can cover like longing for a closer relationship with my maternal grandmother. It covers the long distance relationship. It covers like my longing for like a meaningful job, like a meaningful life. And so I think, yeah, I don't want to stress too much about theme, but I know it's important. So I know windows is coming up. Mirrors used to be another motif. Lipstick comes up a lot in my work as well. So I feel like these are all motifs to then explore something bigger. Do we have time for one more question, or move to wrap up?
One more question for sure.
I think it's probably a good way to end. Now that you've got your books, how did the people that you wrote about feel about what you said?
I don't think my brothers read it, but I'm not sure. My mum has read it, and I think it softened our relationship a lot. I think that there's probably a lot that I wasn't able to articulate between us in conversation, particularly because she has mental health issues and there's so much shame around that, which compounds the shame around size and all of that, that being able to do it in a different mode helped. And my dad, I don't know about my dad. My dad's just like proud soccer dad. My dad's the guy that says like, that's my daughter. So I think he enjoyed it, but that's as much as I know.
So my book was very much focused on my relationship with my mother and my maternal grandmother, more of a secondary character. And so my grandmother doesn't read English, so I don't think I ever spoke to her about the book, and she's passed away now. So I just think, that's not the conversation I had. And then in terms of my mother, I showed her, I guess a draft, like close to final draft. And my brother, she and my brother proofread it. I didn't acknowledge my brothers in the first edition of my book, and I think he was a little bit sad about that. So he's acknowledged in my second edition. And I've never read it about my brother, and I don't know if I ever will. Like, I think it's not easy writing about people in your lives. And exes, I used to write a lot about exes and one-night stands, and I don't care what they think, and we never cross paths again. But yeah, I think my next book, when it comes out, like, it will probably touch upon this person I had a 2-year relationship with. So I don't know how that's gonna pan out, because I still haven't written that yet. But yeah, I'm a bit worried about that. Thank you so much all for coming today. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, regional writers.